Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk about the best recordings of Bruckner's Fourth Symphony, the Romantic Symphony, which title came from Bruckner himself. Now, this one is really tricky because of the edition issue, and it's recently gotten a lot worse. So let me briefly summarize where we are with it, and then we can go through the various recordings. The bottom line is that Bruckner wrote it in 1874. This is the original version of 1874, which Bruckner never actually heard. It's extremely long. Some people like it because it has a certain freshness of a new discovery, which I think is kind of like, well, you only feel that if you've heard the final version of an old discovery, you know what I mean? But I have a problem with these original versions that Bruckner never heard, because Bruckner was no different from any other composer in the universe. That is, he wrote things, then he put them aside, then he took a look at them, then he revised them and tried to fix them, then he heard bits of them, and then he played through some of it, and he listened to his friends who made suggestions, and he revised. That's what composers do. Bruckner is no different from anyone else in that respect. The difference is that with Bruckner, we seem to think that every single stage, second thought, revision, setback, anything he may have done on the day is a reason to go back and play the thing. And I just think that's horrible. I think it does him such a terrible injustice. I respect people who enjoy the original version of the Fourth. Occasionally, I enjoy the original version of the Fourth. But it does not represent Bruckner's ultimate intentions for this piece. And in particular, there's a really big way we'll get to shortly. Anyway, eventually he revised it. He revised it several times, coming up with the version we know and love of 1878 and 1880. In order to get to this thing, he replaced the scherzo with the hunting scherzo we know and love now, because frankly, the first scherzo is one of his worst movements. It's not effective at all. And this one is like a million times better. He also redid the finale. The finale went through several stages, really quite a few. And there was a movement called the Volksfest, the People's Festival version of the finale, which sounds like this finale, only played kind of sideways with all of its parts scrambled up. It's not very successful. And the reason he had such trouble with the finale of the Fourth, particularly the Fourth, is because the Fourth has a unique emotional journey to traverse. It's a major key symphony with a minor key finale. Those are kind of unusual, first of all. Second of all, in the process of revising the symphony, he turned it from a first movement balanced symphony to a finale symphony, to one where the weight of the argument really is pushed off towards the end. Now, usually that happens in like Beethoven's Fifth type symphonies, where you have a quick first movement and then a big triumphant finale that moves from minor to a heroic major. But this is already in the major. It's a beautiful atmospheric major with many tonal shadings, but it was an unusual progression, and it took Bruckner a while to figure out that what he had actually written was a finale symphony. And so there's a big difference between the original version and the ultimate version. Now, I happen to feel that the ultimate version is the best iteration of the ideas in the symphony. But you may disagree, and if that's the case, then it's perfectly fine to listen to the first version, although we're not going to talk about it when it comes to recordings, because I simply don't like it as much. And that's me. And it's, my YouTube channel. So we're doing what I think is the best version of the Bruckner Fourth, which is this one with the hunting scherzo and the great heavy-duty minor key finale. So that's that. Then something atrocious happened. The Bruckner Gesellschaft, the Musikwissenschaftlicher Verlag der International Bruckner Gesellschaft Wien, decided that it needed to republish in a critical edition the 1888 first publication of Bruckner's Fourth. Now, why did they do this? It's it's an atrocity. It's an abomination because it reflects the result of a lot of interference between the Schalk brothers and all that. And there were all kinds of issues with his publication. Bruckner had to pay for it himself. He had to cough up 1,000 marks to have the publisher, Gutmann, actually print it. And then only under the condition that it was prepared by Bruckner's buddies, the Schalks and Löwe and whoever else was involved, I don't know. But the bottom line is the Stichvorlage, or publisher's manuscript, came to light, and it turned out that it had corrections in Bruckner's own hand, which suggests that he approved it for publication, which may very well be true. But the fact of the matter is that there are vast swaths of it that do not sound like Bruckner and which don't reflect his orchestral practice. And we're not stupid. We know what those are. Nevertheless, the worthies and Benjamin Korstvedt, who was the guy who edited this, thought that it made total sense because Bruckner's handwriting was on it in places, even though he never formally signed off on it, to say that that represented a legitimate version according to Bruckner's own intentions. Now, we have no idea what he approved and what he didn't approve. This is not clean. It's dirty. It has the interference of others, and we already have 2 editions of the symphony about which there is no possible question as to Bruckner's intentions. Additionally, in his will, when he gathered his manuscripts together, willed them to the Imperial Library, the 1888 version was out there. He had claimed that he wanted people to perform it. Of course he did. It was the only thing that had been published. What choice did he have, right? The one that he preferred was 1878-80, the one that we know and love now, and which is the most popular version of the symphony. So I think that what the Bruckner people did in publishing this as a critical edition was a terrible, terrible disgrace, and really something that doesn't serve Bruckner at all. It serves the cause of the international Bruckner, whatever the heck this thing is, the Musikwissenschaftlicher Verlag der International Bruckner Gesellschaft Wien. It keeps them in business. It keeps them busy. It keeps them publishing Bruckner scores. And it's just a horror show for everybody else. So do not listen to the 1888 version of this symphony. Ignore it. There are some old recordings of it. People like Furtwängler and Knappertsbusch, those guys recorded it. And now, because it's back in a critical edition, Osmovenska recorded it for Bis. Other conductors may do it. It's such a mess. It's a joke. It's just a farce. It really is, the whole Bruckner thing with these people. So let's talk about the great recordings of the Fourth Symphony. Surprisingly, there aren't that many. There are lots of recordings of it. It's Bruckner's most popular symphony. But there are some serious interpretive issues, notably in the scherzo, and particularly with the brass parts, which drive me crazy because, the brass really lead this symphony, the horns in particular. And in the scherzo, there's a moment toward the end of each section where the brass have to balance each other perfectly. At the end, the trumpets are going da 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 da, and then the horns take over with ba 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 ba. The trumpets are going dum ba dum bum 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 bum. Right? So many performances, the horns get totally drowned out. You don't hear them at all. And they've got the rhythm. They're supposed to be hammering home that triplet galloping rhythm. Da 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 da. And you've got to hear it. You just have to hear it. I can't understand conductors who don't let you hear it. I can't understand brass sections that can't equalize their sound so that you can hear it. It's awful. So these performances, you can hear it for the most part, somewhat, somehow. And you'd be shocked about, the fact that conductors just don't, I don't know. I don't get it. I just don't get it. Anyway, here are the great ones. You ready? Manfred Hoenig. This is the most recent one with the Pittsburgh Symphony on reference recordings. An absolutely magnificent performance in every respect. Beautifully recorded, thrillingly played by the Pittsburgh Brass. Warm and And just especially with the expressive string playing that he gets from these people, it's gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. This is a tough piece for the strings. Why? Because as with a lot of longer Bruckner symphonies, they play acres and acres of tremolo, but they have to be active tremolos. They have to sound like something. They have to be full of mystery and atmosphere and texture and tension. And that's the difference between a great Bruckner performance sometimes and a dreary one, how the string section hits the tremolos. So if you've got tremolos and you've got horns, you usually have a good Bruckner fourth, right? Next, Klemps, Otto Klemperer, wonderful, wonderful performance. People seem to have forgotten about this one. I don't know. It's with the Philharmonia. It's wonderful. I'm not sure why it doesn't get the attention it used to, because it's absolutely first rate, and it has, I like the scherzo. The scherzo is kind of slow, but like as typical with Klemperer, you hear everything, especially the woodwind parts, and it's full of that romantic atmosphere. It's just terrific. So that's definitely still worth considering if you can get it. If it's hard to get separately, it's now in a box with other Klemperer Bruckner, a lot of which is very good and some of which is, Next, okay, Chella Pitaka. This was the symphony that he took on tour. And I remember the concert in Carnegie Hall because that's all that was on the program was Bruckner Fourth. And no one could believe you could put Bruckner Fourth all by itself on a program. It lasted like an hour and 20 minutes. It was like a Mahler symphony. The tempi are incredibly slow. But, the difference with Chella Pitaka between slow genius and merely perverse and ridiculous is a very, very fine line. Sometimes he hit it and sometimes he didn't. And, you could never tell when it was going to happen. But with this performance, it happened. This, with the Munich Philharmonic, it is slow. The timing on this is 79 minutes and 11 seconds. I think it's got some applause and other stuff. It's very slow. But wow. This is a performance where every note counts, and the coda to the finale is astonishing. The coda has the strings doing this triplet tremolo figure, where it's ya da 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 like this. And he, most performances you don't hear it. You don't hear the rhythm. You don't hear it at all because the strings are just playing a steady tremolo, and it all comes out as sort of one shapeless buzz. But here, it's a tick tock. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It's exactly what Bruckner wrote. At this tempo, he makes you hear it. And it creates just the most amazing atmosphere at the very end of the symphony. It's a glorious performance. It truly is. That really justifies a lot of the folderol and nonsense that Chella Pitaka talked about, epiphenomena and recordings aren't music and, all this silliness, right? But here's a great Bruckner Fourth. It's not your only Bruckner Fourth. It's not a normal Bruckner Fourth. It's a special Bruckner Fourth. Next, all the way at the opposite end of the interpretive spectrum. Oh, Barenboim in Chicago, the best brass playing in the history of the universe. The most amazing scherzo. Holy cow, the brass just go nuts. If you want to hear, what the brass playing in this symphony ought to sound like, this is the one to get. Barenboim in Chicago. Now, of course, he remade it in Berlin. He remade it with the Staatskapelle Berlin, and they're terrible. Not terrible. Not great. Not as interesting. Not as exciting. This is exciting. This is youthful and fresh, and it just has the joy of a new discovery. It's emotional in a way that's physical. Oh God, it's wonderful. You just got to hear it. It's totally fantastic. 3 more to go, folks. Next, Karl Böhm. You got to hear the Vienna Philharmonic do it. There are some horns here, The tempo in this set. Remember this set? It came out on 2 Decca LPs. 4 sides. We thought it was slow. Holy cow, little did we know that Chella Pitaka was still coming down the pike, right? But the tempi are, shall we say, relaxed, but the performance is beautiful. It has a wonderful, wonderful, unique sound of the Vienna Philharmonic as only they can play Bruckner. It's Absolutely gorgeous. The sonics are beautiful, and it comes with a really fine third too, in a twofer. But this is the fourth by itself. Again, it's 68 minutes. You think 68 minutes? We thought, gee, how slow that was. Wrong we were. But boom, in Bruckner 4, it's a classic. It has been since the day it was issued. It really is. But there are two. There are two that are really, really extraordinary and superb and deserve your attention and mine first. And they both involve the same orchestra, interestingly. Joachim's DG with the Berlin Philharmonic. Now, this one is much better than his remake with the Staatskapelle Dresden, largely because of the horns, because the playing is really extraordinary in this performance. It is, Joachim was like a Furtwänglerian in Bruckner in a sense that, he preferred flexible tempos. He always let the music sing. It had that warmth, but also everything had a shape, an architecture. It's Furtwängler with good playing is what it is, basically, and the right addition, except, and this is funny because Karajan did this too in his recordings, which I don't like so much, but in the finale, there's a cymbal crash that comes from that 1888 original printing. It's when it's the first climax when the brass go bwah 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 bwah, bam 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 bam. It does that thing like that with the cymbal crash. It's spurious. It shouldn't be there, but the Berlin Philharmonic parts evidently have it because Joachim does it, Karajan does it, some other people do it too. But we can survive the extra cymbal crash. In the 1888 version, there's more than one. There's some quiet ones. They do. It's awful what they do. Anyway, Joachim, Berlin, Deutsche Grammophon. Absolutely one of Joachim's great Bruckner recordings, and a performance of such warmth and vibrancy. It's exceptional. It's exceptional. However, if I just had to have one in the most modern sound, the best sonics, the most sympathetic interpretation, and the Berlin Philharmonic playing at its absolute fabulous post-Karajan non-abato peak, Günter Wand. Now, he remade a bunch of Bruckner symphonies with the Berlin Philharmonic, as you probably know. And those performances were generally not as good as his last NDR versions, simply because the Berlin Philharmonic had sort of still an overly smooth kind of blended sonority that I thought didn't work as well in Bruckner, especially the brass section, which needs to be well differentiated in terms of timbre. But here's one of those performances where everything went right. It is a glorious Bruckner 4 in magnificent sound, and you just can't beat it. It's just magnificent. So if you're looking for a single Bruckner 4, Joachim, Wand they're neck and neck. They really are. This one sounds a little better. This has the cymbal crash, but they're fantastic. Böhm for the Vienna Philharmonic, and Barenboim for the brass playing, and Chella Pitaka for the total crazy insanity of it. But any of these will do you very well. These are all basically the 1878/80 versions. It's the version that Bruckner himself asked us to prefer, and I, for one, am not going to dispute that with him. He knew what he was talking about when it came to this symphony. Ultimately, we have to leave out the quotidian circumstances of performances in the 1880s when he was old and sick and desperate for attention, and his friends were taking advantage of him, and he may or may not have approved something or changed his mind. There is no reason why we need to even get involved in that. There's no need for it, because we know which versions represent Bruckner at his best, and those are the ones we should be listening to. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much. And if you enjoyed this chat, do please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. Take care.